Hey guys, and welcome back to Rage Gaming. As we are now so close to the release of Elden Ring's DLC, Josh has challenged me to pick just 3 of the best weapons to use for each stat type. That means we have 3 great options through Strength, Dex, Int, Faith, and Arcane. And we'll be ranking them like a tier list, as well as that this is a PvE focused tier list, since that's our main concern in the opening days of the DLC. Also, I'll cut this into 2 sections, the tiers for each stat type, and then when all of them are placed, I'll rank them against each other the best I can, just for fun. I'll be trying to fly through this though to keep it short and sweet, so let's just get started with Strength. Right off the bat, we have the greatsword in S tier. This is universally my favorite and best strength weapon that I would offer to anyone. Essentially, it's the most versatile strength weapon you can use. While it's not the top tier AR or like burst or whatever, there's something so reliable about this weapon with how effective it is at dealing damage, at staggering, at cleaving multiple targets, at running multiple top tier Ashes of War that can often have hyper armor and incredible damage like Lion's Claw or Giant's Hunt. Also, you can buff it up to increase its damage or apply an element that maybe the enemy you're dealing with is weak to. It looks incredible, it's inspired by Guts. What more can I say? It's one of my favorite weapons in the game. The weapon that I've acknowledged recently as a top tier, arguably the best strength weapon in the game, just for output, is Giant's Crusher, so I'm putting that into A tier. The thing about this weapon is you can deal the most damage in one hit. It has a unique heavy attack that causes you to do this kind of frontal flip and deal ridiculous damage. Because it's got the highest AR potential in the game for a physical weapon, you're able to hit the biggest numbers, and if you really want to commit to this and get loads of AR increasing buffs before doing that R2, you can one-shot many bosses in the game. But without all that set up, you can just run like a nice tanky build that's centered around dealing these big hits and having high poise yourself. It's very good. I just put it in A because I find the moveset very singular. It's just good for hitting one target really hard. Also in A tier, I put the Knight Rider Glaive. Much like the greatsword, it's a very versatile weapon, but as a kind of halberd type, it has a unique moveset, a bit more interesting, a bit more different, and a bunch of Ashes of War that you can't really apply to other weapon types. The problem with that is that most of them are just decent good, but maybe not the best in the game. This output is good though, and it's a flavorful, interesting play style. It definitely deserves to be here, but based on its output, I just can't put it higher than A. Which brings us to Dex, which is going to be straight S tier. First, we have Naga Kiba, which is just the longest katana in the game. With the katana moveset, it's awesome, comes with base bleed, and you can run it in every goddamn way possible you can think. This weapon is actually the base of most builds that I've made using one weapon. Being able to buff it up and go to town with some bleed effects, burst with Ashes of War, set up a range setup. There's just so many ways you can run this phenomenal weapon. This is the weapon that I would recommend to someone that's just not sure what to take into the DLC and could run pretty much anything with it and do really well. Strongly recommend. Also in S tier then, we of course have the Bloodhound's Fang. One of the best, if not the best, early game weapons you can get that still performs incredibly in the medium to late game. It comes with a unique Ash of War that has you do this kind of uppercut hit, leap back, dash back in for a following hit. It can be a bit awkward to aim because of the range and distances, but those dashes back and forth, there is some iframes there that you can reliably punish and evade at the same time with. So it's a very beginner friendly weapon. Its stats and output is really good. Also, it's a ridiculously long weapon, which means its range is very forgiving too. The amount of jump attacks I've seen my friends who are learning this game use this specific weapon with, yeah, it's gotta be here. Finally for Dex though, we have the Bolt of Grantax, which is a really cool weapon. A legendary armament that allows you to use its Ash of War and send this kind of red lightning bolt at targets without investing a load into faith or incantations that you normally need to get something like that. The Ash of War itself hits really hard, and you can center the weapon and build around making that deal more damage. But as a kind of spear type, you can power stance these and do running attacks and jump attacks to smash a target with so many successive hits that you can scale the damage that way instead if you want. But either way, it's a fantastic weapon. Next we have Intelligence. Again, it's going to be pretty much S tier, starting with the Darkmoon Greatsword here, obviously. There's something so simple and awesome about this weapon. Because it's got cold scaling, you can debuff the enemy for a pop of damage, and then something like a 20% damage increase for, I believe it's 30 seconds, while the frostbite effect takes place. When you buff up the weapon, you get even more frost build up on your attacks, and obviously now your heavy attack becomes that classic ranged arc of a Moonlight Greatsword. You can fast cast it or fully charge it for absolutely ridiculous hits, and a build centered around that for charging that up and making it deal the most damage per heavy attack use is pretty much meta. Again, it's another one of my favorite weapons in the game, and the whole series in general. Between this and the Bloodborne version, I don't know which I prefer. Okay, so our next weapon for intelligence is Death's Poker, which is still S tier. The Ash of War is pretty much where all of this relevance is. The basic moveset of Greatsword is fine, but the output that you care about is entirely the Ash of War here. You press it, there's kind of a small explosion and frost buildup. You follow that up with a light attack and you spread this long range, wide reaching, kind of cold fire on the ground. That builds up the frost at a staggering rate and deals ticking damage to those standing in it. Obviously that's insane in PvE against a boss that's just dumb AI, that's just kind of standing and walking through it. You spam those out and deal incredible sustained DPS from relatively good range too, so it's pretty safe. The other option obviously is the heavy attack that just kind of follows up and does a big explosion. It's nice burst and has some knockdown potential, but if you're looking for max DPS against a boss, I'd probably be spamming the light attack more, because the raw output of this Ash of War and a build centered around that, it has to be S tier. Much like the last weapon here, the Wing of Astel. This has two really important aspects to it. Firstly is the heavy attack, which allows you to do these kind of medium range shotgun blasts of these similar magic rune arcs to, say, the Dark Moon Greatsword, but with a lot less force behind them. The thing is, you can just send one out quickly and, poke something down, do an easy punish in the middle of a boss fight where normally you wouldn't be able to punish a small window like that. Or you can charge it, send out 2 blasts at once, follow that up with another heavy to follow the combo into 4 shots at once. And all of this just costs stamina, no FP required for a magic ranged attack. That's crazy. But most of the DPS and burst is going to come through the Ash of War, which basically as you plonk down these cosmic explosions on a target, you do it at point blank, and then you do it so quick that you're able to follow it with another Ash and another and another and another, damaging in great bursts, maintaining great DPS, staggering the foe, leading to more Ashes of War. It's a very straightforward and very effective intelligence weapon. Okay, so now it's time to talk Faith. Alright, Blasphemous Blade. Yep, it's one of the best, if not arguably the best overall weapon in the game. You deal damage with the Ash of War and it heals you. You land killing blows while it's simply equipped and it heals you. Also, it's a mix of physical and fire, which is just a great damage type. The Ash of War deals fantastic damage, has potential to stagger and knock down. You can do it from ridiculous range, so it's super easy to punish. And one of the main popular builds around this is about getting the Ash to deal great damage, right? But also maximizing your health pool, so you're able to get max value out of the 10% heal you get per Ash of War cast. The more health you get, the bigger that 10% actually is. It's become one of the most popular weapons for learning the game and dealing with some of the hardest challenges because you can kind of out-heal while damaging. For exploring the DLC, it's going to be hard to beat a weapon like this for that purpose. Also in S tier for Faith though, we have the Sword of Night and Flame, which has had its ups and downs. It was originally the best weapon for PvE killing in the entire game because of the Ash of War. You can either follow up the Ash of War with a light or heavy, and then you get a AoE fire blast, wide reaching, great for, catching multiple enemies or punishing a fast moving boss. Or you use the night version, the laser, the magic, a pinpoint accurate mini comet of Azure you can spam out. You would just get around bosses and spam this into their back over and over and over, killing them incredibly quickly. It was nerfed in different ways, but then brought back in, I believe, 1.07 to, instead of being say the most busted weapon in the game, just be an incredible choice for specifically PvE boss killing. It requires a mix of faith and intelligence as well to run, which I think might be a good idea in the DLC because it's themed around Miquella, who has a lot of, incantations to do with having a mix of intelligence and faith. Lastly, for faith, I have an A tier pick. It's Ordovis Greatsword, which is just, a great sword that has some faith to it, and it's fine, but the Ash of War is particularly good. You're able to absolutely spam out this quick spin slam for really impressive DPS, and how quick it's become after a buff to that Ash of War cast time. You're able to maintain really good DPS on a boss. You can build a pretty good setup here by just pressing yourself against them and putting all the power into the Ash of War spam. But because it's all about that Ash of War and nothing else, I leave it in A tier. Okay, so we're down to arcane in the last 3 picks here. First up, I have an occult version of curved swords. These are the scavenger blades, but obviously the bandit are great as well. You could run one of each and that'd be fine, but you just put these into occult scaling and, you know, level your arcane. This will increase the amount of blood loss buildup, but also the raw damage of the weapon while being, yes, an arcane build. Run this with seppuku and you increase the AR to a great amount and the blood status buildup to ridiculous amounts. This is how we just do running and jump attack spam into targets for incredible sustained bleed procs. It's a very simple and effective playstyle, and one of the strongest for boss killing in the original game, where most bosses were vulnerable to bleed. Obviously, we're worried about bleed being something that they're concerned with. They made Faith quite bad against the final bosses of the original game. Maybe they're going to do something with bleed since it was so effective before, but there's nothing right now to tell us that bleed is nerfed or it's not going to be good against the bosses. And if it is, it's going to be a top tier pick, and I would go with the scavenger and bandit curved swords if that's the case. Otherwise, for arcane, of course you can go with the Mohgwyn spear. Honestly, it's a great spear. It's a good weapon. A mix of that cursed blood means you got physical and fire once it's buffed up after you've used the Ash of War. The moveset's, you know, great. It's very long range, good stagger potential. The running heavy attack is phenomenal. But again, the Ash of War is the mainstay, the stealer of the show. As long as you can get that cast off, you're pretty much gonna bleed everything to death around you. Any boss that allows you to get like 2 or all 3 casts of this off is gonna lose massive chunks of its health through just the raw damage and obviously the bleed procs. It's a well-known top tier pick, and yeah, there's not much new I can say about it. That brings us to the final pick that I put in A for arcane. It's the Mariah's Executioner Sword. This is the corkscrew build, all to do with successive hits. Again, fully about the Ash of War. You are basically corkscrewing into the target, and all those ticks of damage are building up successive damage. With the talisman and maybe the wondrous physic that increase the effect of that scales your AR massively, meaning each following tick hits harder. Pretty cool playstyle as well, using kind of like this force magic. You're like a Sith Lord with this greatsword, but it's also very singular. The power of the greatsword outside of the Ash is not amazing. It's just the raw DPS potential of that Ash with the right setup is so good that it could fully carry you in every boss fight, especially with the fact that it has nothing to do with bleed as an arcane weapon. If bleed is buffered with resistances or anything like that in the DLC, this is going to be a top tier pick if you really want to run arcane. Alright, so there's the tier list for each of the 5 types, and obviously it's a little bit S-centric. So I figured I'd rank them against each other as best I can, just to make things a bit more varied. So here is our new setup with that in mind. The reason that I've got the glaive down here at the bottom is just because the raw output doesn't really compete. Say the greatsword is no longer S tier because I just don't think it's got that kind of consistent DPS that some of those S tier picks do for boss crushing. I think it's just better for general gameplay and dealing with every scenario well. I've got the Wing of Astel down below the other intelligence options because the base moveset and using the weapon to attack is not that strong. You're pretty much relying heavily on the heavy attacks and the Ash of War. And with that in mind, actually, I'm going to bring down Death's Poker because it's kind of the same thing. Mohgwyn's Sacred Spear is obviously an A tier down below the S tier stuff, not because his output's not amazing, but again, fully Ash of War focused compared to, say, the occult, you know, curved sword spam, which is consistent in all scenarios, really quick and effective. It's just better at getting that output sooner. Something like the Bloodhound's Fang is something that you get immediately at the beginning of the game, and it just kicks ass the whole way. So if I'm comparing them against one another, this is generally how I would do it, but obviously this is a lot more just random and not to be taken too seriously. But obviously compared to what we're looking at here, that was at least a little bit more interesting. But there you have it. That's my best attempt to pick 3 top tier options for each stat type and then rank them against each other. Limiting myself to 3 for each has been also very hard because there are way more top tier options for all the stats. In any case, hopefully the new weapons of the DLC do compete, creating new metas. But until next time, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.